Kadiri University and the staff, Honorable the Dean of Law Faculty of Kadiri University and the staff, Honorable all speaker and participant in the seminar. My name is Pama Devita Moro, the moderator of today's seminar. I'm very pleased to sit here for holding the seminar about the policy and action, the government policy and action toward COVID-19. Okay, as we know that today we are in the pandemic era, and all it make the changing of the world, including the changes of policy and then government regulation, etc. So today, the Law Faculty of Kari University held the seminar, international seminar, with the title Government Policy and Action Toward COVID-19. Ladies and gentlemen, we have three honorable speakers today. Let's greet one by one. The first one is Dr. Ahmad Masum, the head of law program of the Faculty of Sharia and Law from University Islam Sultan Sharif, Brunei Darussalam. Good morning, Mr. Ahmad.
Morning. How are you?
Nice to see you there.
Thank you. Thank you.
How are you today?
Alhamdulillah, I'm fine.
Thank you for joining us,
Okay.
sir. And then the second speaker is Dr. Siti Hafsyah Idris from Faculty of Law, University Teknologi Malaysia. Good morning, Miss Hafsyah. Good morning. Okay. It's not connected yet. Okay, next, the last speaker, Mr. Harsono Nyoto from Kadi University. Hello, sir. How are you today?
I'm fine, ma'am.
Thank you for joining our seminar today, sir.
Yes.
Okay, after that, we will read the program of this seminar as follows. The first one is opening the ceremony by reciting the national anthem of the Republic Indonesia, and then national anthem from Malaysia and national anthem from Brunei Darussalam. The second is opening speech from the Vice Rector 3, and also he is the lecturer of Faculty of Law from Kadiri University. And the third one is the presentation for each speaker. Number 4, the question and answer session for all the honorable speakers. And the last, closing and taking a picture together for the all participants of the speaker. Okay, let's begin the first session for this seminar. Let's pay our respect for the national anthem of Indonesia Raya. And the next, let's pay our respect to Negaraku, the national anthem from Malaysia. national anthem is national anthem from Brunei Darussalam. Let's pay our respect to Allah Perihalakan Sultan. Thank you. Our second program is the opening speech from the Vice Rector of Kadin University. He is also the lecturer from Law Faculty of Kadin University. May I invite Mr. Kustanto, SHMH, for the opening speech. Mr. Kustanto, the time is yours.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Honorable Rector of Kadin University, Mr. Insinyur Dr. Harto, and all Vice Rectors. The first, Mr. Arya Disambut. The second, Mr. Sigit Winarto. And last, Mr. Ab. Honorable President of Sudanto Supriyadiwan Songo Foundation, Mr. Dr. Heru Malang. Honorable Dean of the Law Faculty of Kadin University, Mr. Heri Sukarman. Honorable Head of International Affairs or Foreign Affairs, Ms. Pamatia Vitasmoro. Honorable Speaker and my guest, the first, Mr. Dr. Ahmad Maksud from Syariah and Law Faculty, Indonesia, Brunei Darussalam. The second, Miss Siti binti Hafsah. Miss Siti Hafsah binti PhD from Law Faculty, University Technology Mara, Malaysia. And the last, Mr. Dr. Harsono SHMH from Law Faculty of Kadin University. And honorable seminar participants. This seminar took the theme of government policy and action toward coronavirus or COVID-19. The government act to mitigate and stop the coronavirus pandemic. Government action and step in the form of policy and law. Jeremy Bentham said, that law is the command of the Supreme, meaning that there is no law outside the government. There's law, there's government. There's no law without government. On this occasion, I hope that law become a guideline, action and center for change and development in society, nation and state, now, in the future, and forever. Good luck. Thank you so much. Thank you for all, and God bless you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kusata. A very nice and enthusiastic speech. Now we will move to the main program, the presentation from each speaker. Before the presentation begins, let me read the regulation how the presentation will be going on. Number one, during the seminar, we turn off all the participant features. The participants are invited to ask the question for each speaker to the chat feature. Put us on the Zoom and then YouTube and live streaming of our other social media platform accounts. Number two, each speaker has around 20 minutes for delivering the presentation material, and our team will select 2-3 questions from the participant for each speaker, depend on the time left on for the select session, and we will read the question for the speaker after all the speaker presented the material. Okay, now let's begin. The first, I would like to invite Mr. Ahmad Masum to present his material about 20 minutes. But before that, I will introduce the curriculum vitae for Mr. Ahmad Masum.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Sorry, sir. I will introduce you first.
Okay, I'm waiting. Yeah.
Okay, the profile of honorable speaker. The first one is Dr. Ahmad Masum he is the senior assistant professor and the head of program of the law faculty of upholding the rule of law in government process and then the right of women in Malaysia, the right to developing and correspondent application on developing countries, and the right to life under the Malaysian Federation Constitution. That is about Mr. Dr. Ahmad Masum from Brunei Darussalam. Now the time for him to deliver the presentation. Mr. Ahmad Masum, the time is yours.
Okay, thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh once again. So first of all, I would like to thank the organizing committee of Kadiri University for giving me this opportunity or the platform to basically share my views with regards to actions taken by the government due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So this morning, I'm just going to share with you one important point, something that we have actually witnessed in most countries or nearly all countries all over the world, that is with regard to movement control order in order to do what? To curb the spread of the virus. So COVID-19 basically stands for Coronavirus Disease 2019, when it was first discovered in China. So the topic for my presentation today is about COVID-19 and freedom of movement, and I'm looking at it from constitutional point of view, looking at the Malaysian Federal Constitution. So this is how the paper is divided, a very quick introduction, giving an overview of what actually freedom of movement is all about. And then we will look at freedom of movement under international law. Then we look at freedom of movement under the Malaysian Federal Constitution. Then we look at restrictions to freedom of movement under the Malaysian Federal Constitution, specifically picking out the case of COVID-19, and then finally come up with the conclusion and recommendations. So if you look at the introduction, I'll just highlight very quickly because of time constraint. So first of all, when we talk about freedom of movement, it is something that modern states generally recognize its importance, and then it is given to citizens or non-citizens in some countries. And as far as the Malaysian Federal Constitution is concerned, freedom of movement is basically a constitutional right given to every citizen of Malaysia, meaning to say that as a Malaysian citizen, you are free to move freely throughout the federation. That is in basically when I talk about the federation, I'm talking about the 13 states. And if you look at it under international law, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 13, Sub 1 basically states that everyone has the right to freedom of movement and residence within the borders of each state. So to basically cut the story short, freedom of movement is an important aspect of basically a civilized nation. Now, if you look at the aim of this paper is basically to examine the operation of freedom of movement as a fundamental right under the Malaysian Federal Constitution, looking at the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic. Because we all know that as a result of COVID-19, governments basically came up with policies to restrict freedom of movement, for instance, from one state to another state, from one country to another country, due to what? Due to the basically the way how the disease spread, the virus spread very, very fast. So they are trying to contain it. So the aim of this paper is to address this issue with regard to freedom of movement. So in other words, restricting your freedom of movement, is it something that constitutionally allowed in Malaysia? So if you look at freedom of movement under international law, because we are basically part of the international community, and by virtue of being part of the international community, we have international instruments. And I have cited two important instruments here. One is the UDHR, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, 1948. So if you look at Article 13, basically there are two.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Can you share your PPT? Can you share your material?
Come again?
Yeah.
I'm
Share the
sharing.
material. Yeah.
I'm sharing it.
But we can see this material.
I thought I was sharing it. Okay, let me just check again.
Okay, yeah. Can we have you to share?
Okay, you can share that, no problem.
Okay, yeah.
Because
okay,
I thought I was sharing it.
okay.
You can share it, no problem.
Okay, sir, wait for a minute.
Sorry for that.
Okay. Wait a minute, sir.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Mr. Ahmad?
Yep.
Yeah. Can you share by yourself?
I thought I was sharing it already, actually.
Yeah, but we can see.
Can you see
from
now?
the picture. Yes. Okay. Okay. We have
That's
seen.
what I
Okay.
was saying. I was
okay.
sharing it.
Yeah.
All right.
You can continue your presentation, sir. Okay. Thank
Okay,
you.
so
Yeah.
let me just reduce this first. Just give me a second. So I was explaining basically the international. Can you see the screen?
Yes, we can
Is
see.
it clear now?
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so I was just explaining freedom of movement under international law. And I did mention earlier that we are part of the civilized nation. And being part of the civilized nation, we are part of the international community. So if you look at freedom of movement under international law, I have actually cited two important international instruments here. Now, the first one is the UDHR. And if you look at Article 13, sub 1 there, it basically states that everyone has the right to freedom of movement and residence within the borders of each state. And if you look at sub 2 there, everyone has the right to leave any country, including his own, and return to his country. So I would just want to explain very quickly about this point. So if you look at Article 9, sub 2 of the Malaysian Constitution. Now, Article 9, sub 2 of the Malaysian Constitution, freedom of movement is only given to citizens. Whereas if you look at Article 13 of the UDHR, it talks of everyone. So whether you are a citizen or a non-citizen, you have freedom of movement to move around basically borders of the state. And then if you look at sub 2, you also have the right to return, assuming that you have left the country and you want to come back. So you are allowed to return back. But of course, we have seen some countries whereby they are saying that because they want to contain the disease, some countries, even their citizens became what? Stranded in foreign countries. They want to come back home. But then the government is basically saying that we are unable to bring you back home because of what? Lack of resources. And if you look at Article 12 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, it also states what? Everyone lawfully within the territory of the state shall, within the territory, have the right to liberty of movement and freedom to choose his what? Residence. So again, this is very, very important. So in other words, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, it is also addressing the same point with regards to freedom of what? Movement. And then, of course, if you look at sub 2, everyone shall be free to leave any country, including his own. And then, of course, if you look at sub 3 there, it is very, very important. Now, sub 3 basically tells us what? Freedom of movement is not qualified right. So in other words, your freedom of movement can be restricted. And we are going to see that in the context of Malaysia in a moment. Now, the other important point, of course, the issue with regard to freedom of movement under international law. So we are basically saying that if you look at freedom of movement under international law, you realize that actually the freedom of movement appears in three manifestations. One, it encompasses the right to move freely within a country and to choose one's place of residence. B, it includes the right to cross an international border, expressed as the right to leave any country, including your own. And C, it extends to the right to return to one's country. Now, this is very, very important, especially when you talk about A and C in the context of our discussion. Now, A basically tells us that you are free to move around the country. But what we have seen is that with the outbreak of coronavirus or COVID-19, government restricted the movement of their citizens. For instance, if you are in Jakarta, you are basically told that you will not go to Medan. Why? Because we are trying to contain the spread of the disease. Now, the other important point, of course, is the issue of returning, because some of the citizens of, given countries, when the outbreak of coronavirus came into picture, some of them, they had left their country and then they want to come back. But of course, like as I've said earlier, some countries, they don't have the means. And because they don't have the means, they're basically saying that we are unable to basically bring you back. So this is what you're talking about here. Now, in the context of Malaysia now, which is basically the main theme of my discussion, I have made reference to Article 9 sub 2, which deals with freedom of movement. And if you look at Article 9 sub 2, like as I've mentioned earlier, that the freedom of movement in Malaysia is only given to citizens. And if you look at the article also gives right to citizens to move freely throughout the federation. Now, in Malaysia, freedom of movement is understood as what? To move around the country, not to move outside the country. That is not part of your freedom of movement. And then the right of freedom of movement also, I have given some few cases there. So that is basically talking about the issue with regard to freedom of movement is understood basically as now, the other important point, of course, freedom of movement, basically, they are restrictions. Like as I did mention earlier, freedom of movement is not qualified right, whether it is under international law or our domestic laws. So in other words, if you look at it from the point of view of Malaysia, someone may argue and say that what the government did was actually right. So as a citizen, you cannot basically say that your freedom of movement has been what? Restricted. Now, under the Malaysian Federal Constitution, of course, we have certain provisions. If you look at Articles 9, sub 2, Article 9, sub 3, Article 4, sub 2, Article 149, Article 150. So these are some of the articles which deals with restrictions on your freedom of movement. Now you look at Article 9, sub 2, which is very important to us here. It basically says what? That permits Parliament to regulate freedom of movement on 4 grounds: security, public order, public health, or punishment of offenders. So I would like to highlight the issue of public health. This is very, very important. So when you talk about freedom of movement your freedom of movement being restricted on the basis of public health, the issue of COVID-19 comes into picture. So this is what we are talking about here. Now, the other important point under Article 19, under Article 9, sub 2, it is important for us to pay attention to the ground of what? Public health. So in other words, is it constitutionally illegal to restrict? Now, this is the question that we have to ask ourselves. We have seen in Malaysia, the Malaysian government came up with the movement control order. But what I'm trying to say here is that, can someone go to court and challenge this order, for instance? Because all that what we are saying here is that, is it constitutionally legal to restrict your freedom of movement because of the COVID what? And if you look at Article 9, sub 2, you would agree with me that actually it is constitutionally what? Legal. But of course, I want to make a point here. Malaysia did not invoke Article 9 when basically Malaysian government came up with the idea of the movement control order. So these are some of the basically photos that I would like to share with you. You can basically see how beaches are basically empty. You can see streets are empty. You can only see men in uniform. So the question here, freedom of what? Movement, but in a good way. Now, what are the restrictions to freedom of movement? So I have posed a question here. What is the legal position of the movement control order that was imposed by the Malaysian government in order to curb the spread of COVID-19? Because when the outbreak of coronavirus or the pandemic came into picture, countries globally responded very, very seriously with regards to what should be done. Countries have closed their borders. Even up to now, it's very difficult to fly. Countries, they have restricted movement of their citizens. Now, the question here is that, what is the legal position of the movement control order that the government of Malaysia imposed when basically this issue came into picture? Now, the movement control order first imposed on March 18 to control the spread of COVID-19 was previously extended 4 times until June 9. Now, the imposition of the movement control order was constitutionally legal by virtue of Article 9, sub 2. So in other words, I'm arguing that there is nothing wrong with the movement control order. So if you look at it from constitutional law point of view, the Constitution gives you your freedom of movement, but the same Constitution also tells you that it is not qualified right. So in other words, the government, basically what the government did could be said to be constitutionally what? Legal. Now, but again, like I've mentioned earlier, the movement control order the government imposed was not as a result of Article 9, sub 2. The movement order actually that the government imposed was as a result of using the Prevention and Control of Diseases Act, 1988, which actually this act gives basically what? The Director General of Health basically to come up with regulations So the regulation that we have, the movement control order, was as a result of the PCDA 1988. Nothing to do with Article 9 sub 2. But what I'm saying here is that, assuming that someone basically says that I'm challenging this movement control order in Malaysia, we are saying that your chances of winning the case is very, very slim. Why? Because the government will invoke Article 9 sub 2, saying that we are restricting your freedom of movement on the basis of public health. So, and of course, Malaysia has successfully contained the spread of the pandemic and has now entered the recovery phase. So under the recovery, basically, of the movement control order, almost all social, educational, etc., have been in place. We have seen basically places, people basically, things are basically coming back to normal. Although some people, they still work from home in Malaysia, you get the point, but still there is that kind of improvement there. Now, the other important point, of course, you look at Article 4 sub 2. That is also another article that basically gives the government here basically an upper hand to basically invoke restriction on the freedom of movement. So if you look at Article 4 sub 2 sub A, provides that no law can be challenged if it imposes restrictions on the rights mentioned in Article 9 sub 2, but does not relate to the 4 permissible grounds specified therein. So this is just, I mean, it is kind of an hypothesis. Assuming that actually public health is not mentioned, assuming it is not mentioned, public health, or nothing is mentioned, dalam Article 9 sub 2, then we are saying that you can actually invoke Article 4 sub 2. You get the point? Because Article 4 sub 2 basically says what? That if your freedom of movement is curtailed by virtue of the article, then you cannot challenge it. There is no even judicial review for that matter, because Parliament here basically is what? Supreme. Huh? Now, the other important point, of course, I would like to highlight on Article 150, which is very important. Again, this article was not invoked. But Article 150 basically gives basically the young Dipatuan Agong, of course, acting on the advice of the Prime Minister, to basically declare a state of emergency. So in other words, Malaysian government can actually go ahead and say that, you know what, the outbreak of COVID-19 is a case of emergency. And it's because of a case of emergency, we are limiting your freedom of what? Movement. So this is what basically we are trying to address here. And that could be basically as a result of what? Security becomes an issue, economic life, or public what? Order. So this is basically the issue with regard to freedom of movement in Malaysia. Now, then of course we have also to look at the recommendations there. So we have to basically agree on one thing, that we are dealing with a very difficult time, because we are talking about freedom of movement. People want to go out. People want to basically, do their work, engage on their business activities, etc. But then the question here is that we are saying that we are dealing with two conflicting interests. We are looking at the issue of public health on one side, but we are also looking at the issue of individual freedoms on the other. And as a result of basically this conflict here, we are saying that freedom of movement in Malaysia, or even under international law, it is not basically absolute. It is a qualified right. Freedom of movement is qualified, meaning to say that restrictions are allowed to be imposed on your freedom of what? Movement. Now, the other important point, of course, the imposition of the movement control order due to the COVID-19 outbreak could be viewed as constitutionally legal. Although the Constitution was not used, my fellow colleagues, the Constitution was not used to come up with the movement control order, but rather the government used basically an act which deals with prevention of diseases, giving the Director General of Health powers to come up with regulations. So the MCO that we have in Malaysia, it is basically regulations put forward by the Director General of Health under the Act, and as well as the Police Act. So, but the most important thing that we have to take note of is that we don't need to come up with basically blanket sort of like limitations or restrictions. When we are going to come up with such restrictions, we have to make sure that the restrictions are in line with some of these international instruments. For instance, if you look at the ICCPR, Article 13, basically sub 3, clearly mentioned that freedom of movement is not absolute, it is qualified. So in other words, your freedom of movement can be restricted on the basis of public health. So all in all, just to wrap up the discussion, as far as freedom of movement is concerned in Malaysia, it is a constitutional right which is given to citizens, but the right is not absolute. The right is qualified. Limitations are allowed to be imposed on such rights. And as far as this paper is concerned, the argument was with regards to the movement control order. Malaysian government restricting movements of her citizens to move from one state to another state. You get the point? So that is basically what it is all about. And the other important thing, of course, is that freedom of movement is basically a right that is also guaranteed under the international instruments. We have looked at Article 13. We have looked at Article 12 of both the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and of the ICCPR. So Vita, that is all from me, and I welcome questions, clarifications, etc. Thank you for having me. Hello?
Thank you,
Hello?
Doctor.
Yes.
Very nice presentation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I
Thank you so
personally
much.
agree with the freedom of movement in a good way must be done during this pandemic, yeah, for a healthy reason. Thank you, sir, for your nice presentation.
Thank you for
Okay,
having me.
next, we will invite the second speaker, Dr. Hafsah Idris from University of Malaysia. But before that, I will introduce the curriculum vitae of Dr. Hafsah. Okay. Dr. Siti Hafsah bin Idris is the Deputy Dean of Student Affairs Faculty of Law, Malaysia. She is also advocate and solicitor of High Court of Malaysia, the researcher of Committee of Consultant for Environmental Law Review Malaysia, expert for Biosafety Law Malaysia, affiliated members of National Bioethics Council and Steering Committee of National Bioethics Committee. She also the senior lecturer of University Technology Mara Malaysia, the ambassador of our International Affairs Faculty, and then the expertises she is in the biosafety law, bioethics and law, environmental law and policy, mental health law and ethics, insolvency law, constitutional law. And then her research about the indicator for ethical assessment and the new learning model for industrial revolution, indigenous research for food security, and then Biosafety Act, and then the role of Utility and Biosafety Act, also the Waste Disposal Law, Law for Regulation and Child Abuse. And then she also have selected publication. Number 1 is Assessment Bioethical Issues. Number 2, Bioethical Issues for Relating to Farmer. And then Genetically Modified Food, Applicability of Sustainable Development, Integrating of Biotechnical Concern and into Biosafety, bioethical issue related to with GMOs, public engagement in biosafety decision making, and then biotechnical issue in public law, bioethical issue of genetically modified organism, waste disposal law and waste management system and law. This is the profile of another speaker from Dr. Hafsah from UITM. Now the time for Dr. Hafsah for delivering the speech. Hello, Dr. Hafsah. Hello, Miss.
Your team. So I'm choosing the topic on environmental law, which is one of the issues in COVID-19. But before that, I want to actually to correct some of the information in my profile, which though I am qualified as advocate and solicitor, but in Malaysia we cannot practice as advocate and solicitor while working as a government servant. So I'm not, I'm a non-practicing lawyer, but I was given a license to practice back years before. Okay, and then environmental law is actually my area of study, but I'm focusing on bioethical issues pertaining to biosafety to the environment. So now I'm moving into the research on ethics and also plastic use. So one of the issues with COVID-19 is actually on plastic bans, single plastic use. That is why I chose a topic on the match between COVID-19 and also plastic ban, because at one point we need the plastics, as for example we need even the mass domestic, the bottle for hand sanitizer. Okay, and then domestic plastic, because during the lockdown everyone stay at home and food are delivered to their homes, so it increased the usage of plastics. So we want to see here actually what is the stance of the government pertaining to single plastic use during COVID-19, and then also the frontliners, they are using PPE
Sorry, Dr.
from
Hafsa,
plastic.
can you share slide, next slide?
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is actually the introduction that I mentioned just now about COVID-19, new reality and new normal, because it's a normal thing, it's a global thing. It's not only the plastic issues, it's not only in Malaysia, but also it's globally. So the sudden shutdowns of movements around the world, yes, it reduced air quality. It reduced air pollution, sorry, and increased air quality. But at the same time, COVID-19 pushes plastic waste. Why? Because of the usage of plastic. Everyone did a panic buying, use the plastic, and then some of the governments they hold the ban of plastic use because of the pandemic. So this actually increase the plastic pollutions. Okay, on the management of plastic waste, healthcare facilities have experienced an explosion in the use of specific kinds of plastic, for example, medical supplies, disposable masks, gloves, and then municipal solid waste also from residents also increase. And then these actually raise concerns. For example, plastic face mask and also glove. Since COVID-19 pandemic outbreak, face masks are considered an essential item as well as gloves. Some citizens, they are using glove actually to protect themselves. And the stock on the market has been running out as millions of people don't to use to buy this item. And then people actually, they don't realize that the fact that they're using this is actually hazardous to them. And then because they don't really dispose the item properly. So they do not segregate the item, they use face mask, they use glove, they use hazardous, and then they just put inside the domestic waste. So these are the issues in Malaysia, because we can see on the street, some people just throw these items on the road, the glove, the face mask, the sanitizer bottles, they don't really dispose it properly. So actually we need to address the issues, and then a proper SOP, standard operating procedures, is required to protect those people, especially to those in Indonesia. From what I research is that it's actually harmful to the garbage collectors workers, because they are prone to be exposed to these hazards, because we do not have the proper way to segregate the things, and then it's mixed up with the municipal solid waste from the residents. Due to that fact, they don't have any, if they don't have the local waste collector, if they didn't have any SOP on how to dispose it, it's actually harmful to the workers and pity them because they don't have the protections. And this will increase the numbers of COVID-19 cases. Apart from that, not only the issues of healthcare facilities such as face masks, glove, and also hand sanitizer bottles, but also it increased the numbers of domestic waste. Like I mentioned just now, when people are locked down in their homes, they're prone to buy more items, and this will increase more plastic waste. Can someone help me to I can't see my slide because of this thing, because of the participants waiting rooms. Can host help me with this? Because it's appear in my slide, this one, 5 people and have entered the waiting room. Can I just So what are the issues? So the legal issues is plastic bags are making comeback because of COVID-19, despite legal measure to reduce plastic waste. Because before COVID-19, before big lockdowns, most of the governments globally, they have agreed to ban single plastic use. Okay, but due to the fact that more demand from the citizen during lockdowns, so especially a pressure from industry, they ask the government to postpone. For example, EU, they ask the postponement of the ban of single-use plastics because of the need plastic use to be for the domestic use as well as glove, hand glove. So if the repercussion of this is that this is the pictures of the waste of face mask and also glove. Okay, if just 1% of the mask were disposed incorrectly and dispersed in nature, this will result as many 10 million masks per month polluting the environment. So incorporations of social factors and uncertainty in this will actually impact the sustainability of the environment, not only them, but it's create unsustainable of industry, because it give impact, it give profits to the industry, but at the same time we have to sacrifice the environment, and this is not fair. These are the regulatory measures for plastic pollution in Malaysia. As for now, we have the main environmental act in Malaysia, which is Environmental Quality Act 1974, which there is no specific legislation addressing plastic pollutions, but as pollution per se, yes, it is covered under the act, but it's not specifically on waste pollution, plastic pollution. But waste, yes. And then we have solid waste and public cleansing management. Okay, this act is to secure law and policy on solid waste management, domestic solid waste, and also public cleansings. And this law is actually being used to mitigate plastic pollutions by imposing proper management and control on solids management. Apart from that, we also have a roadmap actually, the Solid Waste and Public Cleansing Management Act to secure law and policy in public cleansing and solid waste management. And then we do have the Malaysian Plastic Pact MPP, where it will play its part in contributing to the success of Malaysian roadmap towards single plastic use 2018 to 2030. This pact aims to collectively strive to develop a single plastics economy as envisaged in roadmap from all key stakeholders. So on part of that, Malaysia will also receive support and cooperation from the other, also one of the issues, overlappings of jurisdictions and also a conflicts, not only overlapping but also conflict. Who has the pit and substance? Who has the authority? Who should enforce the law? For example, if pollution happened, it's supposed to be under the Department of Environment, but whether the extent of the pollution is actually within the limit in the act or not. Not separating solid waste is an offense, okay, under the solid waste and public cleansings. But yes, it's quite difficult actually to find 1,000 ringgit equivalent, I think 5 million rupiah. But it's quite difficult actually to find the residents on the offense. So actually, the object of the waste separation is to tackle waste from the point of generations. So here we know it's quite difficult because everyone is using face mask, everyone is using glove. So actually, we can find them, but because it's being practicing by everyone, it's quite difficult to actually to really pinpoint who are these persons. And then so far in new policies from the government, that new regulations that starting from 1st of August next week, all citizens, all Malaysians, not only Malaysians, the public need to wear face masks when they go to crowds, especially to the market, to the mall, or to any gathering that involve a crowd people. So we have to face masks. But the thing is, how do we dispose the mask? Normally, and then it's also reported that by the Minister of Health in Malaysia that some of the cases infected by COVID-19 because they are using fabric masks. So that means we have to use the medical mask, not the fabric mask, the washables. So the safety is the medical mask. So the issue is now, how do we dispose these masks? So recycling is not recycling. Yes, recycling is one of the ways to reduce plastic, but for face mask is very hazardous, as mentioned just now. So we need really Malaysians, actually, not only Malaysia, but it's also in other countries, ASEAN countries, we really need to look into our existing law on environment, on solid waste management, on how actually we want to dispose all these healthcare items during COVID-19. With that, thank you. Okay, Miss
Thank you,
Vita.
Miss.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for your nice presentation, Miss. Okay, so it means that the COVID-19 makes the increase of disposable mask waste, yeah, in not only in Malaysia but only all over the world. And if we can manage it well, it will make the pollution of the environment. Thank you, Bu Hafsia, for your nice presentation. And the next, the last presenter he is Dr. Harsono Nyoto. Before that, I will introduce the curriculum vitae of him. Yeah. Dr. Harsono Nyoto is the postgraduate lecturer of Kadi University. He is also the speaker of Advocate Profession event and then also the member of Asosiasi Pengajar Hukum Keperdatan APHK. And then he also the book author of Perlindungan Hukum Terhadap Obat Kadaluarsa. He is also the members of Forum Dosen Persaingan Usaha or FPDU. That's all about Dr. Harsono Nyoto. Now the time for him to deliver the presentation. Dr. Harsono Nyoto, the time is yours. Okay. Okay, while waiting for Mr. Harsono, after this one, we will continue to the next session, namely question and answer the question. So the audience, you can deliver your question into the chat, and we will select the question, and then we will ask the question to the speaker. Okay, if you have some trouble with your English, maybe you can share your question in Indonesia, and we can help the audience to translate it into English. Ready? Are you ready? Not yet. Okay, while waiting for Mr. Harsono Nyoto preparation, we will play the profile. Okay.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi, salam sejahtera bagi kita semua. Sebelumnya saya ingin memperkenalkan diri, saya Heri Lilik Sutarmanto, selaku Dekan Fakultas Hukum Universitas Kediri. Fakultas Hukum Universitas Kediri merupakan salah satu fakultas favorit dan fakultas unggulan di daerah eks Karsiden Kota Kediri. Ini terbukti dari lulusan Fakultas Hukum Universitas Kediri yang sudah banyak dan sukses, baik di bidang kepengacaraan atau lawyer, sebagai konsultan hukum di sebuah usaha, pegawai bank, dan instansi pemerintah yang tersebar di seluruh Indonesia, baik di Jakarta, di Jawa Timur, Jawa Tengah, maupun dari Nusa Tenggara. Hal ini karena memang kami banyak mempunyai mahasiswa dari daerah-daerah tersebut. Adapun ikatan para alumni yang sangat membantu para juniornya atau adik kelasnya yang baru lulus dari pendidikan dan ingin mengembangkan karirnya ke depan, sehingga dia bisa belajar sebagai lawyer, sebagai konsultan hukum, dan berkarir di instansi-instansi pemerintah maupun swasta.
Okay. I will read it again, the profile of another speaker for the last speaker, Mr. Harsono Nyoto. He is the Postgraduate Lecturer of Kari University, also the Speaker of Advocate Profession Event, and the member of Asosiasi Pengajar Hukum Keperdataan APHK, and the book author Perlindungan Hukum Terhadap Obat Kadaluarsa, and also the member of Forum Dosen Persaingan Usaha or FPDU. Okay, now the time for Mr. Harsono Nyoto for delivering the presentation. Dr. Harsono Nyoto, the time is yours.
Yeah, thank you everybody. Really, I must talk with English language, but I know my English is very poor. So later, Mrs. Vita will help me. So I talk to Indonesia language. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Awal diketemukan COVID-19. (31 Desember tahun 2019), WHO di Cina mendapat pemberitahuan tentang adanya sejenis virus yang penyebabnya tidak diketahui. Gejalanya adalah batuk berdahak, demam, sesak napas, dan infeksi akut yang menyerang paru-paru. Hal tersebut terdeteksi di kota Wuhan, Provinsi Hubei, Cina. Seiring dengan penemuan tersebut, tepatnya 11 Februari tahun 2020, WHO mengumumkan virus tersebut adalah COVID-19. COVID-19 di Indonesia. Presiden Joko Widodo mengumumkan secara resmi kasus tersebut di Indonesia di Istana Negara pada 2 Maret tahun 2020. COVID-19 pandemic is not only a problem in Indonesia, but it has become a global problem. COVID-19 pandemic limits the ability of business actors to implement agreements that have been made. To handle the COVID-19 epidemic, the government has issued legal regulation that limit the range of people movement. Now I talk to my language because I know my English is very poor. Pada 11 Maret tahun 2020, COVID-19 di Indonesia memakan korban, tepatnya di Solo. Seorang laki-laki yang berusia 59 tahun. COVID-19 memakan korban hingga 22 Juli tahun 2020 sejumlah 53.657. COVID-19 menyerang banyak korban juga di beberapa negara. Regulation on COVID-19 handling. Keputusan Presiden RI Pak Joko Widodo nomor 12 tahun 2020 tentang penetapan bencana non-alam penyebaran COVID-19 sebagai bencana nasional. Peraturan Pemerintah nomor 21 tahun 20 tentang pembatasan sosial berskala besar dalam rangka penanganan COVID-19. Peraturan di daerah yang pertama di Jakarta adalah Peraturan Gubernur nomor 33 tahun 2020 tentang pelaksanaan pembatasan sosial berskala besar dalam penanganan COVID-19. Itu peraturan di daerah yang pertama dan di ibu kota. COVID-19 spread according to. Now I talk to my language. Penyebaran COVID-19 sangat pesat dan WHO, Badan Kesehatan Dunia, telah menyebutkan COVID-19 adalah pandemi. Juga pemerintah Indonesia menetapkan COVID-19 sebagai bencana nasional, sebagaimana keputusan Presiden nomor 20 tahun 2020. Penanggulangan bencana nasional tersebut dilaksanakan oleh gugus percepatan penanganan COVID-19 berdasarkan keputusan Presiden nomor 7 tahun 2020 yang kemudian dirubah dengan keputusan Presiden nomor 9 tahun 2020 tentang perubahan keputusan Presiden nomor 7 tahun 2020. Keputusan Presiden Widodo tersebut berlaku mulai 13 April tahun 2020 dan permasalahan hukum yang terjadi akibat COVID-19 di sektor perjanjian yang nanti mungkin bakal saya kupas di perjanjian bahwa COVID-19 sebagai alasan force majeure untuk tidak menjalankan kewajiban. Juga adanya COVID-19 berdampak besar dalam aktivitas bisnis secara global. Kemudian beberapa hari yang lalu, tepatnya 20 Juli tahun 2020, Presiden Jokowi mengeluarkan Peraturan Presiden nomor 20 tahun 2020 tentang Komite Penanganan
like public places, they should basically take the measurement of your temperature. Then they should have basically kind of like providing sanitizer, for instance. You wash your hands or you clean your hands with what? So these are some of the policies that I have observed in Brunei Darussalam. But overall, I think the government of Brunei Darussalam has